Cool. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ann Disher, and I'm Executive Director at Common Good Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us for what we're calling a briefing on the income tax cut proposals that are moving through the state capitol right now. And all of you giving up a lunch hour to listen in to a presentation on taxes, you are our people. Thanks for being here. The stakes of the debate are frankly pretty high, as we'll talk through today. And things are going to probably start moving pretty fast at the Capitol. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going walking through our agenda. All right, very good. So you can see our agenda here. I'm going to start out our conversation today with an overview of the income tax in Iowa, its importance to our state budget, and basically why it's our favorite tax. Then I'll turn things over to Common Good Iowa's Deputy Director. Mike will walk through details on the tax cuts lawmakers approved just 2 years ago, the main income tax proposals that lawmakers are debating at the Capitol this session, and the stakes for Iowans. And then Mike will pass the baton back to me to offer some thoughts on a better path forward and what you can do to help push back against more harmful cuts, including how to talk taxes with friends, family, and maybe your very own legislators. And then finally, our policy analyst, Sean Finn, will help us facilitate a Q&A session. You are welcome to drop questions in the chat throughout the presentation or hold them till the end, and we'll make sure your presentations get answered. And this call is set up in meeting format versus a webinar, so you do control your own sound. So I do ask you, if you during the presentation keep yourself muted, but when we get into the Q&A, you're welcome also just to take yourself off of mute and ask your questions directly. So to start, why we love the income tax, and the unwritten subhead here is and why you should too. So I want to start by looking at a little bit of data. So one reason that we love the income tax is that it is a critical part of the state budget. The pie chart in front of you shows estimated general fund revenue for the upcoming fiscal year for our state. That's fiscal year 2025, which starts in July. So the biggest wedge on the right in orange is the personal income tax. It is expected in the next fiscal year to make up 43% of revenues. The second biggest wedge is the sales and use tax, which makes up 38% of revenues. Corporate income tax makes up just 7% of revenues, and other taxes and receipts add up to about 12% of the budget. So you can see that Iowa depends quite strongly on the personal income tax to fund our budget and in turn fund state services. But I do want to call your attention to that gray starburst in the bottom of your screen. So you'll see in 2025, the personal income tax is expected to make up 43% of the budget, but you can see in the current fiscal year, this year, it makes up 47% of the state budget. And just a year before that, in FY23, it made up 50% of revenues to the state general fund. So just put a pin in that trend. It'll come up later in our conversation. So now we love the income tax, not just because it raises revenue, right? But because it raises revenue that is critical to funding the services that Iowans value. This pie chart shows a breakdown of the governor's 2025 general fund budget. And I just want to kind of spend a second and walk through really what's in that budget. So you can see the biggest thing that the state does is support education in our state. Pre-K through 12 schools, community colleges, and state universities make up 57% of our general fund. And really, most of that orange education wedge is state aid to local school districts. That's over 40% of the entire state budget. Our kids depend on the income on the state budget to help them go to school. As we go clockwise around our pie-shaped wedge, the next biggest wedge, of course, is Health and Human Services. HHS includes the vast array of social supports and public health services in our state. And of that wedge, the biggest chunk is healthcare provided through Medicaid and Hawkeye. And let's be clear what that is. That is health insurance. That is health insurance for kids, for families, for people with disabilities, and for older Iowans in nursing care. That's the biggest chunk of health and human services. The rest is social services, public health, childcare. As we were continuing to go clockwise around our budget, the next biggest chunk is justice and judicial services that make up 9% of the budget. That's our state patrol, our court systems, and corrections. And the last wedge, the other wedge, includes a whole array of services, including economic development and agricultural and natural resources. So I guess the moral of the story of this slide is the state budget funds services that Iowans care about and that they aren't going to be happy to see cut. So another reason we love the income tax, and my little ode to the income tax here, is that at least for a little while longer, the income tax is our only progressive tax. And just a quick reminder, thanks to Drake, of what progressive and regressive taxes are. A regressive tax is a tax in which higher income people pay a lower share of their incomes. And a progressive tax is one in which higher income people pay a higher share of their income in taxes. So I want to actually show you what that looks like when we look at revenue in Iowa. The bar chart here shows the percentage of family income that goes to the income tax, broken down by income groups. So starting on the very left, you can see that for the lowest 20% of earners, the share of income going to the income tax is actually negative. And that is because of our state's refundable earned income tax credit, which is just so helpful to low income working families who often struggle to cover just essentials. Now you can see that the bars start growing steadily higher as you go up in income. The second lowest group pays 1.7% of their income to income tax, the middle 20%, 2.4%, and so on. Folks in the top 1% of earners pay an average of 4.2%. So that is a progressive tax, one that asks people who earn more to contribute more to the common good. Now let's just compare that to the other major taxes in Iowa, the property tax and the sales tax. You can see that the pattern is absolutely flipped on its head. The higher the income, the lower the share of income that goes towards that tax. So those, my friends, are of course regressive taxes. And they are the reason why our overall tax system, when you put all three of these taxes together, puts more burden on low-income households. The progressive income tax simply does not make up for the regressive nature of the sales and property tax. I think you can probably guess then what cutting the income tax does to tax fairness. And again, I will ask you to put a pin on that. So I'm going to switch gears for just a moment to talk about Florida. You may have heard some Iowa lawmakers aspiring to be more like Florida. So I do want to spend a minute to talk about Florida and about other states that, like Florida, have no personal income tax. So what do we know about states with no income tax? Well, first, we know that they tend to rely on tax revenue connected to natural resources or tourism. So think oil fields in Alaska, presidents' heads carved into mountains, or in this case, sunny beaches. Those are three items that Iowa does not have in huge quantities. We also know that in fact, states with no income tax are usually really only low tax for rich people. They are actually often high tax for low income people because they tend to rely more on sales and property taxes. And what does that get you? Well, in the case of Florida, it gets you the most regressive state and local tax system in the country. And that is due to some analysis by a group called ITEP that we actually rely on quite a bit to help us model changes to Iowa's tax system. So I just invite you, when you hear that a state is low tax, to really ask the question, low tax for who? So that's some context about the income tax and other taxes in Iowa. I am going to, at this point, turn the conversation over to Mike Owen to talk about recent tax cuts and current tax cut plans that are alive at the Capitol. Mike, I turn the screen over to you.
Hi, everybody. Trying to get to my screen here. Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on. But one of the first things you have to recognize is that the recent changes and the coming changes are both going to present tremendous challenges to our state. First of all, the changes that have been passed already are still phasing in. In fact, they're scheduled to phase in through 2026. So we're still in the early game of that. The biggest piece of that was the idea of moving to a 3.9% single rate personal income tax, a flat rate tax, people call it, but it is a single rate for everybody, regardless of their income, and that will happen in 2026. When fully phased in, that's going to be an impact of about 20% on the budget that passed the year that these tax cuts passed, to give some context to it. It's a tremendous amount of revenue, and it will affect everything that is funded by or supported by the general fund budget. And at that time, as Ann noted, the income tax was 50% of the revenues. So it's gone down a little bit. That's expected because the income tax cuts have started, not as strongly as they will be in this year and the next couple of years, but they have started, and so income tax is in fact going down. Real important point is at the bottom. Yeah, they talk about a single rate income tax. It doesn't mean we're getting a flat tax code, and that's because of what Ann showed you before. It's because our state and local taxes, which are set by state policy, involve, the big ones are the income tax, sales tax, and property taxes, which are for local services. But that overall tax code is what you have to look at. So we're going to make sure by having an income tax that's flat for everybody, that's one single rate, we're actually going to make the overall system worse. We're going to assure that poor and middle income Iowans are going to be paying a greater share of their income in taxes than the wealthy are. This is what the Legislative Services Agency has told us will be the impact of that 2022 bill. So when I say that the income tax cuts have just started, you can see on those left two bars where we are in the first couple of years. But as you can see, you're going to get out toward about $2 billion, very close to $2 billion when these cuts are fully phased in. These again are the cuts that passed already, are scheduled, they are in current law, but that's aside from everything that's being discussed right now in the legislature. There is a race to the bottom that's going on, and Iowa is not winning, but it's trying to get there. As you can see, those 5 states that we show in that chart, in that map, is noted by a report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities that just came out last November. Encourage you to go to the Center on Budget website, cbpp.org. You can get that. You can get that paper and get some more detail on it. But it just shows you who we're actually competing with to go low. So this is what we're looking at here. Again, as things stand now, and this is a report that just was posted on the legislative website yesterday. The 12-month tax memo to legislators. This is really a trend that's been going on. Now we're at 16 of the last 17 months. Income tax revenue has declined compared to what it was a year before, and that we continue to have growth. That's actually, they say negative growth. It's going down over the past year. That's important because we keep hearing from the governor, for example, that what they're doing is working. It's not working. When you cut taxes, you don't increase revenues that are needed to support the services we all care about. It is not working. And for all the denial we get from leadership in our state, the numbers are pretty clear. So now we have the proposals where they're going to be coming back for more. And we say tax cuts for rich people on the sign. Certainly there are small tax cuts in all these proposals for people other than the wealthy. But the wealthy gain by far the most in these things, and they don't need the tax breaks. But this is what is now apparently on the table. Keep in mind that things are really flexible out there in Des Moines, and we don't know how this is going to wind up. But the general parameters are, as you can see in that first bar across, it shows what the current law is, how we eventually go to a flat rate in 2026. The governor's plan would get us to a flat rate of 3.65 right now. Actually, in the year that we're in, you're retroactive to January 1st. And it would take us to a flat rate next year of 3.5. The Senate has, we call it the Senate plan. The Senate and the House both have bills that do this, but it takes us to a flat rate in 2026 of 3.775 and to 3.65 in 2027. What's notable about those two bottom rows, the governor's plan and the Senate plan, is it accelerates what you saw in the graph where we saw how much revenue we're going to be losing. It implements these tax cuts faster and it goes deeper. And as a very important note on the Senate and House plan, it would make additional cuts. It would set up a mechanism for actual elimination of the income tax by using money in the taxpayer relief fund and kicking around a couple times and getting it to a place where they can actually buy down the rates with one-time money or permanent cuts. Very irresponsible. We mentioned that this would benefit the highest income folks. This is an example from those two plans. Again, we say Senate plan here. This is both. This assumes the Senate reference there is to elimination of the income tax. So this is an analysis that we had from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP, which Ann mentioned before. You can see how much better people at the very top do with this. $60,000 for a cut compared to $45 in the lowest, is on average in the lowest 20% of earners. The governor's plan, again, $7. Don't spend it all in one place. And the governor's plan would be for $22,000 at the highest incomes. Now, to get the impact of this is the chart that Ann showed before of what the budget is. Let's get an impact of what eliminating the income tax would do. And the governor's budget really does provide all the context you need because all the numbers are right there. These are certainly broad categories, and Ann outlined a few of the things inside those categories before. But personal income tax is scheduled to be 43% of the general fund in the governor's budget. So you eliminate it and you have the inevitable choice. What are you going to cut? Where is that 43% going to come from? So, we hear a lot when we talk about these things, about tax cuts, about going as far as eliminating income tax, that somehow we're exaggerating things. It's math. This is a very real threat. You're talking about 43% of the general fund resources leaving. So where is that going to come out? Is it going to come out there? As it happens, 57%, we could just fund education and not fund anything else. That would be one option. Maybe it would be this. Maybe it would be get rid of all the health and human services, some of the justice funding, some education. That would be one option. Or go heavier on cuts in education and a little bit less on the health and humans. But the point is, these are the choices that will have to be made. These are choices that cannot be ignored when we're talking about cutting taxes. So anytime you have a politician telling you they're going to cut taxes, your very next question has to be, what are we giving up for it? And if they're telling you that it will pay for itself or it will make up for itself, it's a lie. It never, ever works. And they have to be pinned down on what they are going to cut in services. So if that were not bad enough, the tax cut plans that we have in front of us, there's also a constitutional threat. There is a bill moving in both houses that would require a constitutional amendment, or that would propose a constitutional amendment. The voters eventually would get to vote on it. It would have to go through 2 successive legislatures, but it would require 2/3 supermajority to override. It would take a 2/3 supermajority to actually increase tax rates, to override the bad things that are happening right now. So it gives a veto minority a super minority. It means that a no vote is worth 2 yes votes, substantially anti-democratic. It puts new pressure on the things that don't have those requirements: sales tax, property tax, fees and fines. So it increases inequities in our tax system. And it really cements those things into our tax system by and another provision of that bill would require a single rate income tax. So they're trying to do it in law they're doing it in law with what's been passed, but they want to keep that going in the further tax cuts that are being planned. But this would put it in the Constitution. Now, this is just in. There's a new bill.
Supply chain traceability in our food systems. We talked a little bit about that before.
There is a new bill that Senate Study Bill 3189 that focuses the constitutional amendment just on the single rate income tax. And that committee meets at 8, the subcommittee meets at 8:30 in the morning tomorrow at the Capitol if you want to go and talk about it. There will be committee action on that bill tomorrow afternoon. We hear a lot about how we can afford this because we have these big surpluses. But we have surpluses because of 2 main things. Our economy has been boosted significantly by federal aid that came with the pandemic and the recovery from that. And at the same time, state lawmakers have been holding down investments in services. And I saw a couple of our folks in the education community in the panel here. They know what's been happening with supplemental state aid. If we get even if we get the 3% supplemental state aid that is proposed in one house right now this year, that means we're still going to be down around 2% over the last 14 years on average. You can't keep up with costs with such low supplemental state aid. The other thing is that these surplus dollars are one-time dollars. And so, once they're gone, they're gone. But that surplus dollars are what's being plugged into this so-called taxpayer relief fund that we have right now. And it's getting up toward $4 billion, sizable chunk of change that legislators are eyeing as a way to use that one-time money to buy down income tax rates, but they're buying them down forever. So it's using one-time money for a huge ongoing cost to the state budget. By their own rhetoric, it is irresponsible budgeting. And it's math. So finally, I want to say there's some evidence we're already seeing where in localities, people are preparing for the kinds of cuts, and it's causing a lot of problems. They're having to make the tough choices now. And this is going to be something that we're going to be seeing around the state. We'll be seeing it.
Hi, Tyler. I got your voicemail and I was just giving you a call back. You had called concerning buses.
We'll be seeing it for some time, especially if these further tax cuts go on. But even with the tax cuts that have been implemented, we know that there's problems coming. So at that point, I am going to turn it back to Ann. I probably talked a little too long. Sorry about that.
I don't think so. I think we're doing okay here. All right. So now we're gonna go back to my screen. Great screen juggling going on here. All right. Thanks, Mike. So I guess what do we do with all this information? I want to offer up some ideas for a better path forward, as well as some thoughts about what you all can do to help stop this speeding train at the Capitol. So our real message to lawmakers at this point is, first, stop digging. We're asking them to pass no more income tax cuts that make our system more unfair and force extreme cuts to services. You know, we know enough damage is already coming from the last round of cuts, so we're asking them to be ready to reverse those cuts to protect Iowa's quality of life, not to enact stringent constitutional amendments that would really hamstring our ability to recover from the impending budget cuts we know are coming. There really is a better alternative. Instead of cutting taxes to benefit the wealthy, we should be investing in making Iowa a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And again, I'm looking at folks on the call too, and I know so many of you care about investing in Iowans. And that means things like, instead of tax cuts, investing in strong public schools, making sure our community colleges and state universities are affordable, of investing in affordable, available childcare, mental health services, child health, maternal health. We could be doing so much more to enforce workplace safety and fairness standards. We have so far to go to make sure we have clean water and the kinds of outdoor recreational activities that people want. And finally, we are leaving on the table opportunities to really help low-wage families who work hard but can't make it alone on wages alone by boosting our tax credits. We could double the earned income tax credit that does so much to help families make ends meet. We could join 14, 15 states, including Minnesota, in establishing a child tax credit that acknowledges the costs of raising a family and helps reduce stress and poverty for our very youngest folks. So that's an alternative vision. And we are not only are our current services are at risk, and our ability to do better for Iowans are at risk. So now I do want to touch on the AI generated elephant in the room. I tried to get an Iowa flag in the picture, but the AI isn't quite there for me yet. And that is the elephant in the legislative conference room is this: in a vacuum with no context about the trade-offs that tax cuts demand, we acknowledge the tax cuts can be pretty popular. They can sound pretty good. And so perhaps some of you saw one of the most recent iterations of the Iowa poll, which showed the popularity of the proposal to eliminate the individual income tax. But I want to talk about that. Respondents were asked if they favor or oppose gradually reducing the state's individual income tax rate until it is eliminated. So that's the only context that they got for that question. And you know what? Given no context, not surprisingly, most respondents said, hey, sounds great. The analogy I keep playing with in my head is, it would be like somebody coming by your house with a puppy, and it's super cute and fluffy, and it's like, of course I want a puppy, without having to talk about, oh, the puppy will need to go to the vet, the puppy will need food, the puppy will probably force you to replace your couch because it's going to chew up the arms. You know what I mean? Like, it is that context that might make you think carefully about whether you want that puppy. And so I love this. So the Register's coverage of the poll offered us actually, honestly, a much more nuanced take on the issue than the poll itself. You'll see an excerpt of the article here from Stephen Gruber-Miller with the Register, where he interviews one of the respondents, does a follow-up interview. And I'm blanking her name here, but it's not because she says anything bad in any way. I actually think she's kind of brilliant. So I kind of want to annotate in real time her comments, because I think it tells us a lot really about how Iowans think about this issue. So she first says that tends to be supportive of getting rid of the income tax because she wants to help people who are struggling with the cost of groceries and other goods, right? So that's her orientation, thinking about how do we help people that struggle. And again, the poll didn't provide her, much like lawmakers, with any context for who actually wins and loses when you cut the income tax. So she goes on to say that, you know, she would be supportive if it doesn't require raising everything else, like property taxes and that kind of stuff. And I assume we could probably put sales tax in that category of other stuff. So again, she's saying she doesn't want to raise other taxes. And then she goes on to say that she doesn't want to see the state programs cut as a result, right? So she understands the value of what our state budget goes toward. And then she finally says that lawmakers would have to make sure their ducks are in a row before they took any steps to eliminate the income tax. And by that, she says that programs stay. So she expects lawmakers to be responsible and think about the needs of Iowans. And so even someone who at first blush said, yeah, sure, eliminate the income tax, you can see her walking through in real time, her filling in the context for what that is really going to mean. And that was with no help from lawmakers or from the poll. So I think her comments really opened the door to how to talk about tax cuts. And so, and the first thing to really be aware of is when we talk about taxes, we must talk about them in the context of services and in terms of fairness. So a message that we are leading with is this idea that income tax cuts will blow a hole in the state budget. The results of tax cuts promise to be painful, unpopular cuts to services that help Iowans thrive. And that, you know, proponents are really denying what we all know is that you can't get something for nothing. I think I back to Mike's pie charts taking wedges out. Math is math. The second big message to talk about, to use when you're talking about tax cuts, is the fact that income tax cuts rig our tax system against working Iowans. They are a giveaway to the wealthy, and they will leave working families to shoulder more of the burden. And then finally, related to the constitutional amendment that Mike talked about, it's really clear to make it clear that that amendment would hinder our ability to fix the coming damage from tax cuts. It makes one yes vote to fix a budget mess worth 2 no votes, and it will enshrine a system where the wealthy don't pay their fair share. Those are really the top level messages around taxes. And so obviously, lawmakers really need to hear your voice now. They've been hearing from us and from our partners, and we are really hoping to raise, to give folks tools so that everyday Iowans can weigh in on this issue. We will tomorrow be releasing our tax cut defense toolkit, and because you have registered for this webinar, you will be top on the list to get a copy of that. It will include strategies to help you make contact with your lawmakers, give you some talking points that if you wanted to turn into a letter to the editor, could be done. And actually we invite anyone who wants to do that to be in contact with us because we can help on that as well. It will offer some social media collateral to share on your channels. And thanks to our friends at ISEA, we will include a link to the calendar that they maintain of legislative forums all around the state. And I looked at their forum for March, their list for March forums. And I mean, there's probably 18 or so just coming up this weekend. So I invite you to check out to see whether your legislator may be holding an event where you could come and talk to them about taxes. So at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I see a lot of squares again. And we really do have time left to take some questions. And I know we've got Sean on the line who can help facilitate things in the chat. And so I invite you to drop anything in the chat. I see we've already got some questions. Sean, is there anything you would like to throw out?
It looks like there's been a good discussion so far about the impacts of reductions in property tax, and I think the retirement income tax. Mike, did you want to add anything on that topic, or did you cover it all in that thread?
I think I covered it all as far as I could tell. That was mainly about property tax. You'll recall there were income tax cuts made for retirement income as part of the previous legislation, so that's in effect now. And we've always stressed that taxes should be based fundamentally on ability to pay. And so the idea that because it's retirement income really shouldn't make any more difference than it's from income in a 9-to-5 job, or however, the source of the income should not be the question. The question is, does the recipient have the ability to contribute to the services that we all agree through our legislature and governor are necessary? And so the idea of the retirement incomes breaks are things that we have never supported for that reason. It's not based on ability to pay. Certainly there are some retirees who don't have the ability to pay, but our tax system can recognize that as it can for people who are not 65. But we have that. I mean, that is law right now. It's probably not going to change.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Marie asked a question about the impact of increasing Iowa's minimum wage. I'm going to send you a couple of links, Marie. We've got analysis for $15 minimum wage and a more recent $17 minimum wage piece. That one says that 1 in 4 Iowa workers would benefit from a $17 minimum wage increase. So I'll send you some links. Any commentary on minimum wage you want to add?
Yeah, I would throw one thing in from your own report, Sean, from the recent cost of living in Iowa report that Sean is the lead author on, and it's available on our website. It shows what kind of incomes result from if the minimum wage were made $15, for example, or higher, it would have a different impact. But I would refer everybody to that report, because some of the work support programs that we have are affected by how much what your resources are. So I think that would be a good thing to check out. Wouldn't necessarily be tax impacts alone, it would be on other things that would provide, but that is all part of our network of things that our state offers and should offer to help present more opportunity to families who have trouble getting by.
We also have a question. Is the debate in the House or Senate subcommittee tomorrow? Oh, we need a bill number. Which Bob and Tammy, which bill specifically, or are they looking for a bill number?
Is that the constitutional amendment?
The constitutional amendment tomorrow which is just on the question of having a flat tax, is Senate Study Bill 3189, and the subcommittee is meeting at 8:30 in the morning. And the full committee has it on its agenda for later in the day. So the subcommittees and committees have already looked at the larger constitutional amendment, the one that requires the supermajorities to pass increases. So we're waiting to see if those move. We don't know. And then the questions about the big tax bills is, a lot of the stuff, this process is not transparent. So one of the things to keep in mind about presentation like this is we're trying to help you see what to watch for, because when those bills start moving, it'll be too late to do this.
I see that Sam Groark also asked a question about how the state revenue problem can be helped by properly combating worker misclassification and wage theft. That's a great question. I'll also send a link to our report on wage theft from October 21. In this report, we find that workers lose out on over $900 million in wages that they're owed every single year due to wage theft and misclassification. And we know that that has tax and revenue implications as well. The state of Iowa loses out on over $60 million each year in revenue due directly to that loss of wages for the workers. And that's across all types of taxes, including employer taxes, unemployment insurance, Social Security, Medicare taxes are affected as well. So yeah, that's a very large impact, and certainly we know that that estimate is a conservative estimate, and that we expect that that's absolutely a lower end for the cost of wage theft in the state. So, you know, if the state of Iowa were to properly invest in enforcing our wage payment laws, we know that there would be absolutely a benefit not only to those workers, but to state revenue as well. So thanks for that question. I'll drop the link to the report. I'd invite anybody who also has a question now to come off a mute and ask your question if you have one to share.
While we're waiting, I'll throw a question out there. Who feels kind of overwhelmed by the tax issues? I mean, I think that's been one of the problems or certainly one of the challenges in getting some traction on these things, is that these issues can be very complex. But I think we need to, if you're interested in school funding, if you're interested in Hawkeye and what's available for that, if you're interested in child care assistance, or if you're interested in making sure that we have enough prison guards at our prisons so that the employees there are safe. All of these things have a budget implication. All of these things are then tied to what we do about taxes. So so it was kind of a rhetorical question, I guess, as to the difficulty of dealing with these tax issues, but don't be afraid of them. I mean, it's pretty fundamental. If you want the service, you have to pay for it. How are you going to pay for it? And our legislators ought to be able to tell us that. And they shouldn't be able to go out and just say and get away with saying, we're going to cut your taxes and all will be fine. They're just going to let the chips fall.
Okay, Susan, go ahead.
Hi, Susan Stoffen, rural New Liberty, Iowa. My question would be that I could see that, this flat tax goes through and then they start looking at property tax, and they'll put more regulations on like large landowners or commercial owners, and put limits on that, which will then just drive more for the small property owners to burden more the tax. So just some thoughts on that.
Oh, sorry, I see hands up. I'll wait. I'll put my hand up.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Just a moment. Yeah, I'd say, Susan, just to comment on that, you're right in that if we pull down the income tax and find out that we need more revenue, shockingly, then obviously we need to turn to other solutions, and that may very well include property taxes increasing. And we do know that, you talk about large property owners or commercial getting hit with higher costs. We know that a lot of those costs get passed down to tenants of those buildings. We know that some of the largest costs of property taxes are actually burdened by rent payers and those who are renting their homes. So that's one way that property tax being leaned on more and more is inequitable and not good for equal taxation in our state. Let's go to Katie next.
Thanks. So I just was gonna ask for some clarification. When it comes to the constitutional amendment, that for one, thankfully, it has like a process to go through, right? Like for one, the public has to vote on that, kind of like we did with the Second Amendment one, I think last summer. And then, but I wanted to also get clarity, like what power does that does that take away from them? This is something that I'm not sure how to totally articulate, but in terms of like helping us down the line, they can't change individual income tax. They can't change it for anybody, including the rich. Can they change it for, does that include corporations in that? Does it include the corporate income tax? Sorry for however many questions I threw at you in that.
Well, I'll start with on the process part. It has to go through two legislatures, two general assemblies that are separately elected. So if it were to pass this year, it would have to pass again either next year or the following year in the same form, and then it would go to the voters. If it were not to pass this year, it would be the next two legislatures, and then it would go to the voters. So it's, practical terms, it's a difference of putting it on the ballot in 2026 versus 2028. That's when it could go to get on the ballot. In terms of the 2/3 majorities, that's something I should know off the top of my head, and I'm sorry I can't tell you, Katie, on the question about the corporate income taxes.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just trying to think through messaging to focus in on those audiences. And it's like, on one hand, we're taking away the nimbleness of the legislature to fix problems in the future. And then on the other hand, I mean, there are going to be some elements that are a little more messageable for the public. And, there might be an ideal argument, whereas like, oh, they're not going to be able to increase taxes for corporations and things like that. But if that's not an option, I just want to make sure I know going into that. So thank you. Super helpful.
It does. I'm looking at the amendments right now. It's also for the corporate income tax rate. So you would need a 2/3 majority to increase the individual income tax rate or the corporate income tax rate. Well, that hopefully answers your question, but the larger, it's an issue in practical terms for being able to fix the problems that were caused in the past. I mean, you might have a legislature of, we have a legislature of 150 elected representatives and senators. And under this bill, 17 senators could block a solution that is supported by a governor and 133 other legislators. That's how anti-democratic this proposal is. So
I think, and I'm going to jump in here. I think we've seen in other states that have done these kinds of proposals that even when the political winds change, it's very hard. It's very hard to get that revenue back from the income tax. And, there were some comments in the thread about basically that, it's hard to imagine that will convince the majority party to vote no on these proposals. And to some extent, really the constitutional amendment piece may be the highest stakes, because if it were to go through, it would make it the hardest to undo. And yes, we have time, but I will tell you, if it hits the ballot, it's the Des Moines Register poll problem. It will be very hard to defeat on the ballot. So we can't rest on our laurels that it's like, well, we've got time, and it will be very hard to undo. So, it's all bad, but the constitutional amendment really probably has the longest legs in terms of being able to fix what's going to happen.
Well,
And I
can I add one other thing? I mean, keep in mind how hard it is already to pass increases in taxes. It's extremely hard, just politically. All that we've seen in the last 20, 25 years are cuts in income taxes. We haven't seen any increases in the income tax. But here we're going to make it. I mean, so it's already very difficult. You have to pass a pretty high bar of public opinion to even think about it. So this is really unnecessary. It's a bad idea anyway, because if we are going to raise revenue, that's the smartest place to go to get it.
It's all really scary, and I definitely don't want to deter any action ASAP. I was really just thinking through audiences and where we are in that audience level right now. And yeah, you're right. It's going to be the easiest to fight right now than it would be in front of the general population. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you. I just would also note that your slide decks that have headlines of like all the cuts to education and headlines on, what people are feeling. I think those are super, super helpful. This is such a hard topic to message on. And I think the impacts that people see in their face are going to tell that story. So we need the math. I appreciate all you guys doing the math and having that in our back pocket. I think the stories need to be about what people actually see and feel.
I absolutely think that's right. And we have two, I see one other hand up, Jocelyn, and let's take that final question and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, yeah, thanks for all the work you guys are doing. Just want to echo Katie. It's great work, it's necessary, and it's high time that we focus on it. One of my favorite parts of the presentation was the race to the bottom with the 5 states. And I was looking at Florida, right? So we're kind of evolving towards that kind of economy. And our legislatures, as you've mentioned, haven't really given us an answer. Well, where is the additional funding coming from? From your expert perspectives, where is the Iowan economy evolving towards? And are we going to have to expect to keep losing these services?
It is, I mean, again, I think when you look at the states that don't have an income tax, it's a mix of states that just tax the heck out of poor people and states that are able to raise revenue from folks from out of state or because they have natural resources. Iowa has none of those things. I don't see our economy evolving in a way that gives us an ocean. So I think we are naive to think that the economy will fix this problem. And Senator Cornbrook just put in a note saying that he's got spreadsheets and charts, which we have seen and used to talk about the loss of what's already happened to education funding. So his email contact is in the chat. Well, I want to just pull this back for just a minute to just say thank you for being part of this and to note the obvious that we do not do this work alone. Just in the last few weeks at the Capitol, Mike and I have stood in some cases literally shoulder to shoulder with some of our partners, including Pete Hurd with Iowa Federation of Labor, who comes and talks on tax issues on behalf of Iowa workers, Tom Chapman, who speaks for the Iowa Catholic Conference on behalf of the bishops. And I'll tell you, the bishops on taxes is a very good thing. Pam Mackey-Taylor with the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, who talks about the connection between taxes and the environment, and Connie Ryan from Iowa Interfaith Alliance, who makes the connection to faith communities across the state. We work a lot and rely on the Iowa State Education Association, the Urban Education Network, Rural School Advocates of Iowa, the UAW, AFSCME. All these groups have understood the stakes and they've been advocating on these bills this session. I want to thank Senator Cornbrook for being on the call today and for everything he does at the Capitol on behalf of Iowans and kids in schools and taxpayers. And then finally, I see also that we have Common Good Iowa donors on the call. And I want to thank our donors for your support of our work on taxes and all the other work that we do on policy issues that are important to Iowans. For those who don't know, we are a 501c3 organization, and we rely on donors to be able to show up at the Capitol, to grind out our policy analysis, to pay for the internet and the Zoom links and the staff time to put on events like this. If you are not a donor, I humbly invite you to consider becoming one. Policy work is obviously really challenging in Iowa right now, but the only way out, as they say, is forward. We promise to keep fighting off the bad stuff. And as we try to put out a positive vision for making Iowa everything that we know that it can be for us, for our kids, for our young people, for our workers, for families, for our elders, I'm going to go ahead and drop our donation link in the chat. I'm adding some more to the chat. I'm also going to put my email address in. I invite conversation with any of you at any point on donating or other. I really appreciate you being here with us today, and we'll be sending out the materials from this session, including that tax cut defense kit, hopefully tomorrow. And Mike put his email in the chat too. We are so grateful to all of you who thought that lunchtime tax conversation was a good time. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry you missed that.
Oh, well, but they're gonna send